This is Omer Ahern, the person who started the Christmas tree planting. And Dad, what was the farm used for before you started planting Christmas trees?
Well, we had a dairy farm. We had milk that we sold in Ahern and Plymouth. We bottled it and sold it in Ahern and Plymouth.
Now, did you also use the farm for haying?
Oh yes, we hayed and we planted crops. We raised corn, we hayed all kinds of vegetables.
Now, would you pasture the cows and the cattle down here?
Cows were pastured here in the fields. We hayed certain sections of it, but the fields that were this area here where you got your trees now was all fenced in, and that's where we put our cattle. On the other side of the track was where we did our haying mostly.
Okay, go.
Yeah, the original part of the farm house was where I was born 85 years ago, and it was that all the home was down, all the part of it was down on the end of it, below where the tracks are by the river, but it flooded. And then my uncles on the Ahern side moved the building that was the farmhouse down there and moved it up on the height where it was out of the water. And they moved it whole. That is, they didn't take it apart. They just jacked it up, put it on some long logs, and hooked the horses onto it and pulled it up. When we were giving up to farming, one of my neighbors, Frank Hannaford, who was a good friend of mine, and he said, "What are you going to do with your farm?" And I said, "Well, I've tried to rent it, but I said, the farmers have all the land they need." And I said, "It just doesn't pay." So I said, "Thought of planting Christmas trees." "Oh!" I said, "Why would you plant Christmas trees?" He said, "You spent years cleaning your land and getting it out of trees." And I said, "Well, we're going to use it more like a corn crop. You'll harvest it every 8 to 10 years." And I said, "This is the way it is started, and it's turned out what I felt that it would." And Michael's done a beautiful job on taking care of the trees and shaping them and carrying on where I left off. My Uncle Sonny, Nelson Jones, we had the field more or less given up the farming with cattle, and he said, "Why don't you plant your trees to Christmas trees?" Because at that time he was selling wholesale and doing some retail on his own, and he knew there was a shortage of trees. And however, I didn't have the money at that time, but then Soil Bank came along, where that was a federal program that the government gave you money for taking your land out of production, which we had been producing corn and various crops. So then at that time they also had they laid money away so that when you laid your land up in Soil Bank, you could actually plant some crop. So I said, "Well, all right, we'll plant Christmas trees." And we planted about, at that time, somewhere we ordered 60,000 trees, and we put as many in the ground as we could. And we certainly felt that this was a good decision, and I still think it is, even today. I worked with the county forester, Grafton County Forester, Leslie Sargent, and Leslie suggested there was a fellow from Claremont that would plant the trees. He didn't plant it, but he had the planter, and he hired a couple of men, and they put the trees in the ground. That was all open from the haying we had done the previous year. And then, and this is the same planter that you are using now. They use the same one, and it did a very good job.
Good.
Yeah, one of the principal purchaser that I sold to the fire department, and one department was in Southborough, Mass. They would buy 400 or 500 trees, and then the other trees went to Londonderry, New Hampshire Fire Department, they came up. Of course, we didn't bale the trees at that time. We just cut them and laid them out. So when they came up, and those were principal the people that purchased our trees at that time, fire departments. And then we did have a small retail business, nowhere near what we have today. No, when we planted the trees, we had taken a job as administrators, Rosa and I, for the Sullivan County Home, and that was to be a full-time job, 365 days a year, and which it turned out to be. But then I had vacant fields, so I tried to rent the land to some other local farmers, but they didn't want to pay me enough to pay the taxes. So that's another reason that we planted our trees. And then on when I was at the county home, we would come home, and I had a Ford tractor that we would mow between the trees, and we would my children would help. During our vacations, which we would have occasionally, we would use that to come back and mow, shear the trees. And for the first few years, I hired a fellow from up in northern New Hampshire, up in Pittsburgh, New Hampshire. He'd bring a crew down, and he would go through and he'd shear the trees. That's when the trees are in the large estate. Now, when we planted our first Christmas trees, we didn't cut those till 13 years after we planted them, but they turned out to be pretty good trees. But just prior to that, we had the fellow from Pittsburgh to come down and bring a crew down and shear the trees for us. And he didn't only shear the trees, but he cut the grass and the brush around the trees. He really did a fine job. We felt that with the Christmas trees, that would be something that when our children were ready for college, that we would be able to sell the trees and help them finance their college education. And it turned out to be pretty well true.